what is our primary role in society as jiu-jitsu instructors? You could say it's to keep people fit. You could say it's to teach self-defense. But I think it goes a little bit beyond that. It's that we provide, yes, health to the community, but also like mental health. This has been talked about ad nauseum with jiu-jitsu instructors saying we should be able to open up mental health matters too. And that's true, but we need to do it in a responsible way. But like just talking with these kids, for many of the time that I would start class, I was the first interaction that they had that day.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty like grave responsibility. Like if you decide to become a doctor and you're like, okay, I really want to help people. That's, I think, a lot of the reason why you might become a doctor or a nurse. So you want to help the community. And like when a pandemic hits, it's like, now's your time to be like Superman. And these doctors and nurses are Supermen and women. It's like, but you know, we as jiu-jitsu instructors, we also have to, you know, put on our capes and just like keep going through this situation because our service that we're providing the community is that much more valuable.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with Dan Lukeheart, who I've known for years online because he's been active posting as TrumpetDan on Reddit and other forums that we've both been on over the years. But the reason I'm talking to him today is actually because of a previous guest. Dr. Moriarty told me I should talk to you, Dan, because you've really been at the forefront of implementing protocols in a school. So I thought it'd be a really good example of how try and navigate keeping a school afloat in the middle of a pandemic where the regulations are changing all the time, where there's conflict between what's being said at the state level and at the federal level, probably even at the municipal level, and just see what this looks like on the ground. So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. And how are you doing in this awful time?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I've been a follower of your stuff since almost white belt. So it's pretty cool to actually finally talk to you.
If only we were talking about not crappy stuff. That'd be,
it's definitely been a challenge during this time. And like, we'll get into specifics of how I do the program and whatnot. But I think probably a more important, like a higher, more overarching concept is recognizing the need to do something. Because I don't think people, if they were willing to, could do the program. I don't think it's, for most people, a lack of knowledge, but just a lack of recognition of we have kind of a special responsibility in this pandemic because we will fall under the radars. You know, when people are legislating at the federal or state level, where are they going to put a jiu-jitsu gym? You know, you're just a workout gym or you're just a fitness studio or what have you. So, I mean, we kind of need to take it upon ourselves to do this whole thing. But that requires you recognizing that you have a pretty key role in this pandemic in your community.
Yeah. Have you been classified as, you're in California, you're in Brea, California, you run Brea Jiu-Jitsu. And how have you been classified at the municipal and at the state level? Have you been called a dance studio or a fitness facility, a weightlifting gym? What are you? Because as you point out, there's no way that the idea of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as distinguished from Jiu-Jitsu, as distinguished from Taekwondo, as distinguished from Zumba, they're not making those levels of distinction.
And you know what? I have no idea how to answer that question.
Okay.
If I knew, I would answer it. But there's no guidance that says, it just says, gym. There's gym guidance. So there's that. But are we a gym? You know, all the guidance is for like sanitizing the weightlifting equipment and things like that. Are we a yoga studio? I think there was some guidance for. There's no guidance for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I tried to reach out to the state's like suggestion box for COVID-19, and that just was a empty black hole. So I don't even know. I've been treating myself as a gym. So when they give regulations for gyms, I've just kind of been doing that.
I wonder if they have guidelines for swingers clubs, this being California and all, because that would probably be the closest parallel, really.
Yeah, bars or what have you. Yeah, I mean, like, you can't be. We're a sport where your sweat drops off your nose into the other guy's eyeball. I mean, that's pretty much maximum level contact there.
Yeah. So can you just take us through kind of how your awareness of the COVID crisis and your response to the COVID crisis have evolved since last, call it February?
I would say in the beginning, in I think it was probably early February, I have a Chinese American student that was talking all about it. But he talks about a lot of Chinese issues and things. And I really just dismissed it. I didn't give it any sort of thought. It didn't really come on my radar in a big way until probably the end of February or very first week of March, where I was like, oh, maybe this is going to be a big deal. By about the second weekend of March, I was starting to get some cancellations, and I thought it was an overreaction. I thought it was just like, why are they canceling jiu-jitsu? This is like March 5th, 6th, 7th, something like that. So my initial response was not very in tune with what was going on, I guess you could say. But it soon became clear in the next 2 weeks that this was a big deal. I think we started lockdown here in California about March 20th or so, around there. I'm wrong on the exact date. But about a week before that, so about March 10th, I started to really go, okay, this isn't going away, and this is really a big deal. And that's when I started panic ordering dummies on the internet. Because I figured...
Everyone else was hoarding toilet paper, and you are responsible for the dummy shortage.
I'm stuffing the dummies with toilet paper. I was the one that took all the toilet paper from Costco. But yeah, as far as I know, I was the first person to buy dummies. And I actually didn't buy these because I overnighted them. I bought these, the stiff ones with the arms like this. They were more expensive and they were essentially useless. I only used them for the first week until I got these guys in because these took a little bit longer to ship. But as I figured, I still wasn't even like in full panic mode, to be honest with you, in March, because I figured, okay, whatever the CDC guidelines are, I'll meet it. I don't care. If it's just like 2 people in a 2,100 square foot room, like I can do that. It's fine. And then I'll Zoom the rest or what have you. But it quickly became apparent that they were going to close everything. And then in the United States, we have the 2 weeks to stop the spread, which I was not very optimistic that was going to be 2 weeks because, that didn't seem like it was going to happen. So I was planning for the long term before we stopped that. So I tried to develop about March 10th through 15th this program that I have in place. I segregated the mat into its squares. I bought some air purifiers, the dummies, and then kind of thought through the whole process.
Air purifiers, just HEPA filters or some kind of sterilizer system? So
they're classified as beyond HEPA filters. They remove to 0.003 microns instead of the HEPA filters being the kind of regular, 0.03 microns. So it goes another tenth. Just to help change over the room. Those are something that were controversial in the beginning. Since then, some research has come out to support their use. But kind of the main thing here is to keep people separated and to keep the airflow good. And so we open the doors from in the front and the back. We have good airflow in the room just naturally. And the primary defense is just distance from one another, distance and masks.
I think this idea of airflow is, I get crap at the fire department for turning the fire hall into the wind tunnel. Right, they refer to my crew as the wind tunnel crew, and that's exactly what the idea is. I think this idea of fomite-driven transmission, fomites being touch, there was some early evidence that sent everybody down the fomite route. Kind of, I think it's like polio is driven mostly that way. That then came into perspective, and now it's like, no, this is a respiratory illness. It's spread through respiratory droplets, and we now understand that, and that means moving the air the hell through is the right thing to do. It's amazing how this hasn't worked its way into just people's behavior. Just like open a window, for crying out loud. Like that will help change over the air in the room. So, I mean, like being aerosolized isn't a primary transmission as well, but if that concentration gets high enough, it will become, you'll get that infectious dose if you're just in a small room, as far as I'm aware on the research. The way I've had some luck explaining it to people is imagine that you're in a room with everybody being a smoker, and everyone's exhaling cigarette smoke all the time, and you don't want to breathe cigarette smoke. What would you do? You would mostly try and get it out of the room. So you went and bought a whole bunch of dummies back in March. And then can you just take us through the ups and downs, kind of the compressed timeline of when you were open, when you were closed, when you had group classes, when you had solo classes?
So actually, when I first bought the dummies, I started with the dummies for maybe a week or two, doing the distancing, doors open, air purifiers on. And then they shut us down completely. And then it was all Zoom for a period. So I didn't even get to really use the dummies for terribly long. And then I don't remember it all. It's been all a whirlwind. But for the next several months, essentially, it was all Zoom. And that was pretty rough because you don't connect with people as well on Zoom. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult. So what I did then, remembering now, is I actually delivered the dummies to the students who are going to continue to be active on Zoom, and just lent them the dummies. And that worked okay. Still getting lots of cancellations. Once I canceled school, parents started to panic and students started to panic. And that was like the real, and that wasn't exclusive to me. That was just with everybody. It's just, oh, can I put my membership on hold? I'd like to cancel my membership. Like you're getting like 4 or 5 a day sometimes.
Man, this is devastating, I'm sure.
It's pretty depressing. I'm pretty conservative financially. So I have a 6-month runway, which is a lot of money. Like for a business, that's like at least 3 times what you would need for a personal amount. And my wife was always like, pay yourself more. What are you doing? Why do you have all this money here? But I save it for a rainy day. And it was more than a rainy day. The storm came. Yeah. Goodness. So that helped a lot. And then just trying to truck through is kind of depressing, to be honest. Like you're just teaching and you're like doing jumping jacks and hip escapes and you're doing the dummies. Not all the students have dummies. They're improvising with like stuffing their pants and everything. And you're trying to make it positive. But yeah, it was pretty, I wouldn't say depressing. I don't get depressed. I'm using that as a slight exaggeration. But it was very tough. And it's not only tough financially, it's tough for the kids too. Because their schools are all canceled, which for a week or two is fine. And they're celebrating, but as the time wears on and they realize that they're not seeing friends, you see kind of with some of the kids, I live in a pretty stable socioeconomic area, but with some of the kids, you could kind of see, how shall I say politely, the effects of staying at home all the time.
If their parents aren't doing too well mentally or emotionally or financially, that's going to trickle down to them. Yes,
I'm sure there's that, but it's a lot of it is the parents are working. Like, what do you, the kids are at home and the parents need to work and the kids unsupervised all day, not doing anything, playing video games. Like you can do that for a weekend, I suppose, but these kids were doing it every day. And that's why I really began to sense my responsibility to the community at this moment. It's like you have to keep going because these kids don't have this relationship with anybody. It's not like you can just manufacture a several year-long relationship with a teacher just by paying somebody. Like if I'm gone, then they don't have that relationship. And to have some level of physical exercise, some level of group interaction is super important. Because if you think about what is our primary role in society as jiu-jitsu instructors, you could say it's to keep people fit. You could say it's to teach self-defense. But I think it goes a little bit beyond that. It's that we provide, yes, health to the community, but also like mental health. This has been talked about ad nauseum with jiu-jitsu instructors saying we should be able to open up mental health matters too. And that's true, but we need to do it in a responsible way. But like just talking with these kids, for many of the time that I would start class, I was the first interaction that they had that day. I mean, that's that's a pretty like grave responsibility. Like if you decide to become a doctor and you're like, okay, I really want to help people. That's, I think, a lot of the reason why you might become a doctor or a nurse. So you want to help the community. And like when a pandemic hits, it's like, now's your time to be like Superman. And these doctors and nurses are Supermen and women. It's like, but you know, we as jiu-jitsu instructors, we also have to, you know, put on our capes and just like keep going through this situation, because our service that we're providing the community is that much more valuable. So that's kind of what I was encountering in those early days, especially as I was really feeling quite distanced from my students and everybody was quitting, is that like the emotions that go into like, okay, half your student base is gone in 3 weeks. Like that's pretty crazy. And to just keep on trucking through that is, it was a pretty challenging on my end. I was suffering a lot of stress, and you know, stress, I'm like, do I have COVID? Like, is my chest feeling tight? You know, you're like going through all of that. Yeah, because I was I felt like I was like one COVID diagnosis away from losing my gym. Because it's like, what happens if you get COVID and everybody's freaking out boiling toilet paper? Is anybody going to come back to your gym? Maybe not, because people think irrationally that this type of thing. It could be a couple months later and they're still thinking they're getting COVID at your gym.
What's the situation for schools, not jiu-jitsu schools, but primary schools and secondary schools and high schools in California right now?
I can't answer that question.
Okay.
Because this is why it's so difficult to talk about the pandemic, is that I'm sure, as you're aware, and we alluded to prior to our conversation, is the federal government says one thing, basically says states figure it out. Here's some kind of broad guidelines that you can follow. Then the states, and then in turn, pass it off to the counties. And it's a hodgepodge of response. So,
and did that county supervisor watch a certain YouTube video?
Yeah.
A QAnon YouTube video, in which case the entire policy goes one way.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so frustrating because you couldn't even, in these early days, in March and April, you couldn't even figure out what was going on. Like you couldn't figure, what does the state want me to do? What does the county want me to do? In some cases, what does the city want me to do? Because the city is the one who actually has the cops that go out and enforce the thing. But certain cities are telling their cops not to go out and enforce these health orders. And it was just, it was chaos. So as far as I can speak with my kids and some of the school communities here, when we had the 2 weeks to stop the spread, all schools stopped.
Sure.
And fast forward a couple months, my school district, which has the option of doing this, instituted, my kids' school district, that's what I mean when I say ours, instituted hybrid learning. So you could choose to go in person or you could choose to go to Zoom. Some districts around here were Zoom only. Some were in person. So, I mean, I don't even really know how to answer that question. It's kind of like, it's basically survival of the fittest. Just do whatever you want. There's nobody that's going to be knocking at my door right now and telling me, okay, you can't do this dummy program, or you need to do this, need to do that. It's basically just all on your own shoulders what you want to do right now. It wasn't like that before, but it is like that today.
Yeah. I think I'm in Canada. It's a little bit more centralized and coordinated, thank God. But the thought that keeps on coming to me is the younger kids they've got in regular school full time. And obviously there's some small risk to the community there, but I think that the risk to reward has been balanced appropriately, knowing what we know now, none of which we knew back in March, April, May, June, July. And ultimately, until school started again in the fall, we really didn't know. The high school kids are on this weird hybrid, sometimes in person, sometimes online. And honestly, like, if I was a teacher at the beginning of a pandemic and I really cared about my kids, and I normally work a 35, 40-hour week, I'd be going, man, in order to do my job under these conditions, I'm going to have to do a 50, 60-hour week, because I have to be calling these kids individually. And it doesn't seem that has often been the approach. It's like, oh, I'll just record some videos. You kids will watch them, and then I'll give you the test later. And this kind of goes with what I was saying is kind of survival of the fittest, is that those who really care
and I see this in my kids' school, those that really care and wanted to go the extra mile, we're doing that. Like with one of my kids, he was a little bit more responsive to the situation. The other, it's not like she didn't care. I don't think she just knew like how to do this or how to navigate this whole phase. And, it was a little bit challenging, like just saying to my older son, okay, here's your whole packet of homework. Watch these videos. We have 1 hour of confrontation or consultation on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, where I introduce the assignments, but you're to do it all yourself. That was so difficult. And I know this wasn't just me, is that these kids are getting these massive packets and just saying, do this. And especially early on.
They're being these massive packets. They're being told, do this, and pray to God that you've got parents who are motivated and have the ability, who aren't working 2 minimum wage jobs to try and put food on the table.
It could just be a regular job, to be honest with you. And you got to go to the job. And what does the kid do all day? Yeah. Just kind of hope he finishes his homework, I guess. Like I was seeing this in the kids, and it's not necessarily the parents' fault. Like they have to be able to pay their mortgage or their rent or whatever. And kids just staying at home playing video games. And I'm the first interaction with them at 4:00. And that's where I think I needed to step up and fill not a gap, but like do what I can, like have this kid do some jumping jacks and push-ups and get their blood pumping and their brain active. So they're not, just going down a negative feedback loop at home.
So is your program entirely dummy based right now?
Yeah, it's entirely dummy based. We did a brief period, a month, probably, a month and some change, where over the summer, the case counts here in Orange County, California got quite low. And we did cohort training. So I allowed them to partner with 2 other people for the week. And then we obviously took a little bit more risk while doing that. But I felt it was about appropriate with the case levels that had fallen so low. And that was a nice month for everybody. And then the holidays, the case numbers started spiking again, and we had to go back to dummies.
What's your metric for whether you're going to go to cohort-based training or pod-based training versus remote and dummy training?
Well, right now I set a firm number, which is 500 cases per day in Orange County. We're about 3.1 million in Orange County. And that's the metric I set. It's not scientific at all, but it's based on just kind of what I see around the community. Well, if I'm seeing everybody just taking these crazy risks and I'm sitting here doing like segregated training, like it doesn't make any sense to me as far as my responsibility to the community. I basically want to know is if what I'm doing here in this building was replicated countywide, am I going to make the situation better or worse? And if I'm going to make the situation a lot worse, I say, I don't want to do this. And like, it's kind of funny because I think some people, maybe yourself, I don't know, maybe Chris, I don't know, would criticize this as being a little bit too over the top or too soon going back to cohort training. But almost all of my peers are saying I'm way too conservative, just to open up. Because literally, I'm the only jiu-jitsu school doing this around here. There's nobody else, as far as I am aware, that's still doing dummy training. And that's been true largely throughout the pandemic. I could name every major team around here. If COVID didn't run through their gym earlier on, it ran through their gym this past holiday. And that's because 1 in 20 had COVID and was infectious during the holiday period at its peak. Like if you're going to have a class with 20 people, I mean, just play the odds. Like somebody's going to have COVID in that class.
Mm-hmm. There are actually tools online. I think it was a Tennessee University tool where you can punch in for your county a group size. I'm going to meet with 5 people in my county. I'm going to meet with 10 people in my county. I'm going to meet with 50 people in my county. What are the odds of somebody having COVID in that cohort and being infectious? And at the peak of it, it was pretty bad. The odds were like 30% or something, 20% for groups of 10. which is insane.
That's interesting. I did the calculation myself. I just used the serology data and then the to calculate approximately how many people were being missed in the official daily tests, and then just approximate it. It was a back of napkin calculation, but still, it was a useful metric to kind of understand what was going on.
So how do you keep dummy training interesting? And I've got to confess a personal bias in that I don't think dummy training has been useful for me at all. I've probably owned 4 or 5 dummies. At the beginning of the pandemic, I ignored my own advice, which is don't get a dummy. I got another dummy, and I've used it maybe, with the best of intentions. I just don't like working with them
I
at
hate
all.
it. Are you kidding? I hate this. I mean, but you and I were black belts. We've been doing it for, you've been doing it longer than I have, but I've been doing it 15 years. Like, we don't have patience for dummies. Like, come on. But you know what? Is if you just turn off that part of your brain and you're just like, okay, I'm working with a dummy. It's not ideal. It's actually pretty good. I can teach a lot of different things on the dummies, especially if you're a white belt. It's all the purple belts and above that don't come. Like the white and the blue belts are coming, and they're learning a lot. They are. It's just boring as heck. It's just so unsatisfying. Like when you finish a class, you're just like, okay, here's 4 moves, because like we don't do the exercises with the adult classes because I don't want them respirating a whole bunch, spewing out all that stuff. So I show them, 4 techniques. Maybe I'll do 2 and then do a video analysis for half an hour or something. But it's just like, okay, we're done. Like normally you're just like dead on the mat laying there and just like, oh, all right, I'll get up in 10 minutes. Like, it comes to a natural conclusion, the end of the class. But it's just like so unrewarding. So I got a gavel and I just hit the gavel when the class is done. It provides some punctuation at the end of the class.
I guess we've been spoiled. I mean, there was an era in my training and in popular training where working on a Wing Chun dummy or a Choi Lei Foot Kung Fu dummy was considered, a pretty cool. And, that would be the peak. You wouldn't even be allowed to work on the dummy right away. You had to work on the form first over and over and over. And then when you got good enough, then you were allowed on the dummy. And here we are bitching and moaning about dummies when that's the first thing you go to.
Do you have this type of dummy, the one that can be articulated, or do you have the useless ones?
No, I've got the having had a useless one and having built a few of my own, and then I now have one that can be articulated. It's the one, I don't know the make of it, where the arm attaches to the body with Velcro, so then the arm just flops around. I'm going to have to take some kinesio tape to it or something to try and make it a realistic shoulder. But why don't you show us some of the things that you're doing with a dummy?
Sure. Yeah. No problem. So I can teach a lot with the dummy, like for sure. Actually, there's certain techniques where the dummy is just straight up better. Like it's kind of ironic.
Flying knee on belly.
Flying knee on belly. Definitely not that. But like somewhere you don't need any sort of like sort of resistance from the dummy, and it's no big deal. Ironically enough, I never want to see another dummy for the rest of my life after this is done. Mm-hmm. But there are some things that would be nice. Like if you want to do like 100 leg drags or something, do you really want a partner for that? Then you have to switch, and then you have to be the partner for 100 leg drags or something. If you're just learning about a position, like if you're learning what 50-50 is, like just get your legs in the right spot. It's good. So like, for example, one sequence that I teach my students a lot, I call it the skeleton structure of passing the guard, is largely just killing the de la Hiva, stepping over to the headquarters, starting a knee slice, and then working through a knee slice. And then I can talk about the knee slice a bunch. We can clear it out of the way, and then we can pass or what have you. Like this type of sequence is good. And then you can go to the variations. I step over the leg, and then I can do an X pass, or I can do a leg drag from here, and then my dummy can turtle, and then I can slide on my hip and pry at the thigh and take the back. Oh, you want to learn back concepts? If he's on the bottom hook, we need to make our leg go over across his belly at minimum. You can do a body triangle if you want, but at least go here so the hook isn't cleared. Like you can teach a lot of situations with a dummy. And honestly, it's not that big of a deal. It's just like the psychology behind working with a stuffed pillow. That's the more challenging part. There's only a few situations where you can't really teach that well, which is like maybe stand and open the guard. Like this is a bad one. Like, how is he going to open So you kind of end up like faking it. You like hold him up and then you do it. But it's doable. Stand up is not very easy with the dummies. So I've just kind of been avoiding stand up. But I don't find teaching to be difficult as far as like knowledge acquisition. I've had a few students that joined during the pandemic and they're entirely dummy based. They're like the rats, right? The lab rats, the great experiment.
It'll be so interesting when
They'll be good.
When they're released back into the general population.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe I'll do a video or something and show. Because I honestly, just based on what I see with the dummy, I think he's going to be quite good. I had somebody sign up maybe a month ago, and he's just been working only on the dummies. And I'm really pleased with his progress. So it's definitely possible. It's just upper belts, they don't want any of that. They've already had the good stuff, and they don't want to go back, So
I'm assuming that we'll get to some kind of vaccination threshold in the next number of months where the numbers will start calming down and we can go back to cohort-based training or pod-based training in the hotter spots of the United States and throughout the world. And it'll be really interesting to see. There's a whole bunch of factors. Like, what about people who had a whole bunch of injuries, now had a whole bunch of time off? What about people who used to use jiu-jitsu as their only method of staying in shape, who are now super out of shape?
Yeah, that's
what about?
I do like for the kids. We are doing exercises. I mentioned with the adults that we weren't. So I do like push-ups and sit-ups and things, but that's not the same. Like as rolling, like then as every white belt knows, like when you roll, you're like, I didn't even know I had a muscle right here. Like, how do I exercise that muscle? You get all that. And I went through that when we went to cohort training. It was like, it was like starting over again with your body.
Now you've had layoffs. You're a black belt. For sure you've had layoffs in training from injuries, if nothing else.
Post-concussion syndrome.
Really? How do you get the concussion?
It's just a sprawl. It's so ridiculous. I was rolling with a guy, and we were on our knees, ironically, because we don't start from our knees here. And he shot, and I just sprawled really quick, and my chin hit his back like that. I was 3 years off, the worst 3 years of my life.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I haven't given any interviews on that. People have asked. I just don't like talking about it. I don't mind talking about it now, but it was terrible. It was horrible.
Headaches all the time?
Headaches were not an issue for me. I had memory problems, mood issues, cognition issues, visual processing, talking for long periods kind of sent me cognitively towards a bad end.
Man, that must have been terrifying. Had you had previous?
Never.
Because you sometimes see that with boxers. Boxers who used to get in there and take one to give one or take two to give one, and then towards the end of their career they can't even take a little shot.
That wasn't me. For me, it was. Okay. I've never even had my bell rung, not once. And that I had my bell rung. I heard ringing. I could tell I had a big shot to the head, but I didn't even stop rolling. And I think a large part of that was that I knew I was hurt. I finished that round. I finished the next round. It was just morning training. I don't even take my morning training so seriously. I'm just kind of like warming up for the day. And I think the next day I got the call to do commentary for World Championships. And that was like my big break. Like, you can't say no to that. Like, there's only one World Championships. And then while I should have been resting my head, I was talking Thursday through Saturday or whatever it was for 12 hours a day. And I think that messed me up a lot. I think that really added to the post-concussion syndrome.
Wow.
Because even for years afterwards, I was sensitive for talking for long periods, probably because that part of my brain was active. Yeah.
So here I am dragging you onto a podcast.
No. It's fine now. It's pretty good. But that took 3 years to heal before I was able to roll again.
So what was rolling like coming back for you? Where were the deficits?
Honestly, I was around jiu-jitsu. I was still teaching. Sometimes it was very difficult to teach. But for me, I was just a little slower as far as like processing time, but I didn't forget any techniques really. Largely it felt like hopping on a bike again, but I think that's because I had 10 years or whatever it was experience before then.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure if I had only a year, it would probably rust quite a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had various layoffs, mostly from injuries, and it really does feel like you're moving in slow motion for me. That, and if you're going with the gi, your grip just disappears, or you end up with that whole paralyzed flipper thing after a couple of rounds if you're doing any kind of gi dependent guard.
I don't mind that though. Like that goes away in a few weeks. That's not a big deal. But I didn't feel like I had lost any technical knowledge, except the things that I was working on. Like the things that I was experimenting. I was getting really creative at that time. And that was when approximately when Keenan was coming out with a lapel guard, I think. And I was doing a lot of like interesting experiments with the lapel as a result. So I was feeling really creative in my jiu-jitsu right before my injury. And that all went out the window. Like I forgot all of that because I didn't do it and it wasn't crystallized like a lot of my other stuff. But it's the stuff that I did well, I still continued to do well. It's just like the processing time, like the reaction time wasn't there as much. That was the biggest thing. And that just took probably 4 months to get back, where I was feeling pretty good. 6 months before I was really kind of like feeling really, really good. But 4 months was I felt my reaction time was pretty good.
Yeah. Early in the pandemic, my friend Emily Kwok made the observation that if you've been in jiu-jitsu for any length of time, you will have had to have taken breaks, probably from injuries, maybe just from life getting in the way or whatever. And thus, taking a break from jiu-jitsu in some capacity, whether it's partial or just reduced amounts of training or reduced number of training partner or a complete break, it does feel a bit more normal for the higher belts than it does for somebody who's like a blue belt and super enthusiastic and just went out and bought four gis for $500 each. And
I agree 100%. I have the exact same thought. Is people ask me like, well, why don't you just find one partner and like train, which is hard for my schedule because I have 3 kids and then I run the academy. I have to do that outside of class. And it's like, you know what? Like, I'm okay not training like for a year or whatever. Like it's not the end of the world to me. Like that's less than 10% of my total training. Like you're a blue belt. Like it's your life now. You're eating the acai, you're saying oos, you're doing all that stuff. Like you're going to miss it a lot more and it'll be more intense. It's like being in the beginning part of a relationship, with somebody. It's like in the beginning, you're all over each other. And then at the end, you're watching each other go to the bathroom. I don't mind it as much, especially because I'm around jiu-jitsu. I'm still showing techniques. I'm doing analysis videos, which I enjoy. Like live analysis keeps me like intellectually stimulated. I don't preview the match and I just give my thoughts on it. I enjoy that. Like it's good enough. I don't have testosterone raging through my bones like I did when I was 21. I'm 23 now.
We're not talking about your internet your internet dating years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that idea of keeping your brain active in the sport is really important. I mean, you're around it, you're still teaching it, you're still doing match analysis, and therefore when you get back to the mat, you won't be swimming up from as deep underwater to get back to the surface again. And similarly, when you had to take your 3-year layoff, you were still teaching, you were still watching matches, you're still active in the sport. And yes, obviously, it would probably have been better if you'd been able to be out there laying hands on people. But anything you do, there's a video by a guy about a climber called Adam Ondra, who's just this insane climber. Like he's climbed the most difficult technical climbs in the world. Like some of the stuff is he's had to climb upside down and backwards because it's the only way he can get his foot into the crack up there. And when he was working on one project. I think it was this cave or this route called Silence. He was injured at one point, and there's footage of him working with his physiotherapist where he's on the ground, he's like lying on a mat, and his physiotherapist is putting a hand up above his foot, and he puts his foot on the hand, and then he puts his other hand here to simulate this next hold. So he puts his fingers there, and he's going through the series of moves he knows he's going to have to do. But he's not hanging off of a cliff, right? There's no force on his injured muscles, but it's just keeping the neurological wiring active. And I think that was such a cool clip. I ended up writing an article about it, actually, because he's still training, even though I forget what was injured, probably his shoulder or his grip, whatever. He couldn't exert the force, but he could still keep the neurons firing in the correct sequences.
What was the name? Did you say Alex Honnold?
Alex Ondra.
Oh, Alex Honnold.
Adam Ondra, Ondra. Alex Honnold.
Because I've seen him go through, like, he's keeping notes on his actual grips that he's doing, and essentially the same thing as what you're saying.
Yeah. So I mean, if it's good enough for, I don't know enough about climbing, but obviously both of those guys are among the very best technical climbers in the world, and if they're both doing it in a sport where it's literally life and death, then perhaps we should be adopting that same mentality as well.
Yeah, when I had my head injury, as I mentioned, it was the first time that I did world championships, and Budo Videos had me just doing some lower level events to just kind of try me out before that. And so for most of my time as a commentator before Flow Grappling took over, I was not training jiu-jitsu, but I was watching more matches than I'd ever watched in my career. I mean, when you watch matches, you watch what makes it online. You watch the great matches. You're not going to sit and watch some purple belt masters for ultra heavy. Oh, shoot. Did I just offend people? Okay. No, but I mean, let's be honest. That's not what you're going to watch. And I watched so much jiu-jitsu that I feel that intellectually I made my greatest gains during that period. And I think it propelled me into my current state of knowledge about jiu-jitsu and about strategy and about rule sets, like understanding in detail what the rule sets are and how they inform strategy. And if there's anything that differentiates myself now from other people, it's not as a competitor, for sure not. It's about that type of knowledge. So, like, today there's really good people that seek me out for strategic advice for, like, major matches. And I don't think I would have been able to have that level of information had I not gone through that period.
So what kind of information are you getting? Just percentages, effectiveness of certain techniques or certain strategies, or what kind of nuances are you picking up that are then expandable to jiu-jitsu in general, as opposed to this guy screwed up here and this is why he got his guard passed?
I kind of like accidentally stumbled on this. I figured, I'm the commentator. I should know the rules very well. And the previous commentary by Sean and Jake, and I was commentating with Sean as well, but before that, I forget who, Caleb was before that, was more centered around the technical aspects of the match. And that's something that Sean is very good at and something that he defaults to. He's like, okay, to finish the knee bar, you're going to need to do this and that and the other thing. To get out of it, you need to do this and that and the other thing. But the commentary, and the commentary was an extension of how the jiu-jitsu world thought, was not so much around the strategy and the rules of the match. And I figured as a commentator, these are the things that I should be talking about because it gives you something to talk about. There's not always something technical going on. This grip goes here, this grip goes there. I guess there is at any point. There's some level of technicality. But through large portions of the match to keep it flowing, you're going to need to be talking about those things. So I started to educate myself on the rules. And as I really studied the rules, not just doing what I did before, it's like, yeah, read the rules, okay, I got it. But actually studying, like, line item the rules, and then watching how those rules are implemented and watching how the top guys are modifying what they're doing for those rules, was extremely eye-opening. And I think it wasn't just, in my own case, a revolution of like knowledge. It was a revolution of how I approach the sport, which when purple belt and before, I was always a little bit skeptical of the sportive aspect of it. And I think this is an extension of my entire generation, not just me, where we are unwilling to just say, okay, this is a sport. It's just a game, and let's win the game at whatever cost.
Oh, this is a fight. This is the truth, the light, and the way. And that your fighting strategy has to be the same as your sports strategy.
Exactly. And I still think that Americans in particular have a long way to go on this. It's just accepting it's a game. And if you do, your functional performance is going to go up a ton. Like if you and I were to play Monopoly, you wouldn't argue with me that $200 is what you get for pass and go. You don't ask why it's $200. Why is it not $250? Or why is it not $100? Why is there 4 houses before a hotel? Just, it is what it is. Just accept it. And then let's play the game. I think that was the biggest transformation during that period, is just watching how the game was played by high level guys, and then understanding that, like, often what makes the winner and the loser is not some grand, not even like a sweep or not even a guard pass, not even something big like that. It's something small. Like, why didn't he just do this? He could have just done this and won the match. And it would have, if he just would have pulled guard here, for example, it would have been over. So I think that was like a big part of my own kind of shift in perception, as well as my shift in knowledge base. And I think I kind of like steered the commentary a little bit in that direction and made it okay in certain aspects, because now somebody's on IBJJF talking about rules and strategy. And that's kind of like my niche right now, is rules and strategy.
Okay. That's really interesting. Can you give us just one concrete example of how top level competitors are changing what they're doing to appeal to the rules? I can think of lots, but what's a good example that illustrates this point?
Here's a match I recently cornered. Nobody's going to like what I have to say here. I recently cornered a match with a brown belt, she's in the female adult division. And I looked at the matches of her opponent in those analysis classes that I was doing. And in my estimation, she was a little bit vulnerable to being submitted when she was on top. And a sweep would just be easy. And if my athlete was on top, I feel that she couldn't pass her guard. I felt that she could stay out of submissions, but I didn't feel that she had a chance at passing her guard. Her guard wasn't good enough, and this girl had a really good guard. So what I advised her to do was to double pull and come up for one advantage. I think this is the strategy. I don't remember it exactly. And then if to return to the bottom, she could attack a toe hold or an ankle lock for one advantage, to get the submission, obviously, if you can. But then the ball's in your court where she sweeps you. It's 0-2, but you have a 2 advantage lead, and then you can sweep to win. And I had noticed in this girl's previous matches that she was willing to come on top if she did a sweep. So my advice was to just sell the sweep. She would get down 0-2, but she would be in control of the match. In my estimation, she couldn't pass the guard, my athlete's guard, for anything. And then win the match that way. So that's kind of like an example. I could give you an example on other matches too.
Sure. Keep going.
Single hook. You have single hook at the back. What are they going to try and do? What are they going to try and do here?
Well, often they'll try and pin your shoulder and try and come to the top.
What they're going to try and do is they're going to try and get at the heck out of bounds. That's what they're going to try and do.
Sorry, I'm not thinking like a competitor.
Exactly. Do you see the shift though? Like,
yes.
You know that this is going to happen. Like, you've seen it a billion times. Oh, the guy's going to get out of bounds. It's not that easy to get out of bounds sometimes though, because you can't do it on purpose. But you know the guy's going to try and get out of bounds, because if he just rolls crazy enough, we go out of bounds here, referee's pot-o, and you stand up. Dude, this is an important moment, sealing the deal on single hook. because you're going to be here a lot. You don't want to start over. Imagine you had to go through this whole process of slap and bump. You successfully pulled guard, if that's what you did, and then almost take the guy's back, which is super duper hard. And then he gets out, and then maybe you can modify the strategy and pull guard, and then you don't have that opportunity anymore. Or maybe you just need to start from scratch and you don't have the time to do that. So it's like, okay, that's the rule. The guy can't intentionally go out of bounds to escape a thing, but if it's a logical defense, he can. Okay, that's the rule. How does the rule then change how you train? Well, if that's the rule and you know that this is a common scenario, then you should be training here and you should be training in a box like this. And you go, okay, this guy tries to get out of bounds, but it can't be too obvious. You have to keep him in bounds. Do you want to know who's one of the best in the world at this? Roberto Jimenez. He is ungodly good at keeping it in bounds when the guy has single hook and goes out of bounds. So this is one example of how like the rules can change how you train a little bit, because you have to work on keeping it in bounds. Another situation is the beginning of the match. There's going to be many times where getting to the bottom position first is strategically the best option for you. So you should train that. You should make a game based around this. Okay, first to pull guard wins, which is a lot of times. That is the framework that a lot of times elite level jiu-jitsu works, is like the first person to pull guard here is the winner. Imagine if you're a really good guard player and the other guy doesn't care if he's on bottom or he's on top, he gives you a free guard pull. Well, now you've probably just won the match because you dictate where it goes. Well, let's say both people now know that. Both people know that they want to be on the bottom, so they double pull. So the first to pull guard is the winner. But what happens then when they double pull is that the first to come on top gets an advantage. One thing that's not recognized in jiu-jitsu right now, to the extent that it should be, is that advantage is a huge, huge incentive. There's so many ways that you can use that advantage to your advantage.
And it'll drive the submissions, because now the other guy's more desperate.
He's way more desperate. He's going to do stuff that's a little bit more rushed, that he maybe wouldn't do otherwise. The grip's not going to be perfect. All right, I have this grip. It's not cinched in yet, but I'm going to go anyway and just do it. It's a huge advantage. So one game that I play often is first to pull or first to score an advantage. Think about the consequences of this game. First to pull or first to score an advantage. All right, you're here, you flop, you're the winner. Okay, let's reset. He goes, aha, okay, I'm going to do it. So now you do it the both time, and then you come up. And you won. You got the advantage. He goes, okay, aha, I get this. All right, so you both pull, you both come up, and then you pull again. I swear to God, do this drill, Stephan. Your brain cannot keep up with it. You can't. You're like, wait, did I pull successfully? Did he come up when I came up? Your brain cannot keep up with this type of thing. So this is kind of an example about how the rules inform strategy, and the strategy informs like how you should train. I had one person who was in, let's see, what was it? What match was this? Quarterfinals, black belts, world championships, and this was the game that they played.
Exhausting.
It is exhausting. And you can lose to a freaking brand new white belt, especially if they're smaller than you. Another example is this position. Okay, you want to get to the meat of the issue. Let's actually talk a little bit more. Points incentivize not being swept. Not being swept has consequences. If you don't want to be swept, let's say I'm passing the guard, I just got knocked over. Well, there are certain situations where it's okay to concede the sweep. There's a lot of time left, whatever, you're confident in your ability to sweep them. But there's a lot of times where it's not okay, where there's 3 minutes left and you have to sweep them in 3 minutes. That's going to be a tough order. So you have to fight the sweep. What happens when you fight the sweep? What are the consequences of fighting a sweep? Well, if I do, let's say some simple sweep here. I do a tripod sweep. I knock him over and I get up. Where's he going? He's going to go here. And then when he goes here, I go to the wheelbarrow position. Then when I go here, then we go to the rear clinch. This is the area that people need to be training a lot more. Everybody learns these positions, but they don't emphasize them properly, in my opinion, because this is like this type of sequence, working from a rear clinch or working from the wheelbarrow position, working to keep it in bounds as he tries to coerce it out of bounds. This is like the realm that a lot of jiu-jitsu is in. Think of this. If you pass his guard, He turtles, and before you know it, he starts to stand up. Where are you? You're the rear clinch. You sweep him. He wants to fight it for whatever reason. Where are you? Wheelbarrow and rear clinch. Let's say you take him down. He wants to fight it. He gets up. Where are you again? Mm-hmm. So it's about noticing patterns of what are the... You can't put emphasis on everything. Otherwise, you'll just be at 11 all day, with your emphasis knob. So what positions do the rules the rules inform strategy, and both of those things kind of coerce the match in very predictable ways, in predictable positions and predictable situations. And knowing how to identify those situations both before the match and during the match are like super critical to high-level jiu-jitsu.
So what would you say to the purists or the old school guys who go, man, all this rules and advantages, back in the day, we just trained to make fight.
Yeah.
And how does this translate to the martial component of this? I mean, as you said, it's a game. And I totally get it. And I would agree that any kind of competition is a game, including boxing, Thai boxing. It's a game with consequences. MMA is the same way. Like, you would do things in an MMA match that you wouldn't necessarily do in a street fight.
And we could definitely agree that MMA is much closer to a street fight than competitive jiu-jitsu. So, that's tricky. I don't even like dealing with that world, to be honest with you. It's like I have the skill to defend myself against an untrained opponent. Like, beyond just like clinching against punches and maybe defending punches from the close guard, you're more or less doing the same thing. It's like, okay, if you're interested in that, learn that. But that it gets pretty boring after practicing a little bit. Okay, you can clinch when he's advancing, you can clinch when you're advancing, the distracting stomp kick and everything. Like, it gets boring because you can't really practice it that much. If you're a high-level jiu-jitsu competitor, you're not going to have any sort of difficulty defending yourself against an untrained person. Hop on YouTube, type in street fight. They're not all Division I wrestlers and ex-MMA fighters.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And if you have the mental wherewithal to go, oh my God, I've got single hook in and he's trying to get the fight out of bounds in that direction, I better stop him from rolling. I better, start pulling him back into the middle of the ring or the middle of the mat. If you've got that kind of situational awareness, then you've also got the situational awareness in a street fight to be going, okay, I'm in mount. I should have a look around to see, are his friends coming? Right? I mean, the calmness that it takes to do one is the calmness that it takes to do the other.
I don't disagree, but I just don't care. Like, I can understand if... Yeah, I live in Orange County, California. Brea Jiu-Jitsu. We're in a very stable socioeconomic area where we're not like street fighting. Like, I don't even think I've seen a street.
When you move to Mogadishu, your training will change.
Yeah, but I can understand if you're from like an inner city area and it's like, this is a real threat to you on a daily basis. I could totally understand the perspective shift, but this is my perspective and I don't really care about the other. I have good enough to defend myself under 99% of situations. And, I'm good with that. Like, if I went into high level MMA, I would probably get killed. But you know what? I'm not going into high-level MMA. And you know what? The people who say that their jiu-jitsu is for fighting and all that, they would get killed in high-level MMA too. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
100%, especially if they're just practicing it as a kata as opposed to training it against resistance. But that's a conversation for another day, because then we'll upset a whole bunch more people.
Yeah, you do upset quite a bit more. And if that really interests you, like, just do MMA. That's like a great avenue. I just don't want to get hit in the head for a career. I mean, I got hit in the head and I was supposed to not get hit in the head.
Yeah. So how do people train with you? How do people find out more about you? I know you do have an instructional out. It's Collar and Sleeve, right?
collarandsleeve.com is my instructional.
What's that about? The collar and sleeve?
Collar and sleeve guard.
Okay.
It's a good intro. Has some things there that are really interesting. So check it out. It's $14.99. I don't do the price gouging model. And then price gouge and then say, all right, it's 300% off today only. Yeah, don't do that. I guess just follow on social media, Brea Jiu-Jitsu or me.
Okay. And if you had to guess, if you had to take your very best guess, when would you guess that your classes will be back to normal in 2021?
Normal? Like completely?
Yeah, if you're waving your Nostradamus prognosticator wand, what do you see as the future jiu-jitsu in the next
In our
12
area,
months?
the average person should have access to the vaccine, if they want it, by the end of April. So you would figure that not everybody's going to get the vaccine. And then take a few months after that for everybody to get to that maybe 70, 80% herd immunity level. So I'm going to say early summer. That's optimistic.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's the best current guess, at least for areas of the world and parts of the United States where you're going to get access to the vaccines. I know, Canada, where I live, is a couple months behind you guys because we don't have the capacity for making the mRNA-based vaccines. But as always, as new information comes, we'll have to modify our plans. And it would be lovely if we could say, on July 1st, everything will be back to... that'd be awesome. All right, I'll take a holiday till July 1st. See you all then.
I'd satisfy with just cohort training. Me training with one or two other people. Almost.
Yeah, almost. All right, Dan. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And one day I hope to have a conversation which we don't mention dummies and don't mention...
I'm going to have a dummy burning party with my students.
Burning Dummy, the slightly smaller version of Burning Man. Or you go back to the tradition of the ancient Druids, which is create the Wicker Man.
I'm not familiar with it.
So the peaceful, loving, the peaceful, nature-loving Druids who, were just kumbaya until the Romans came along and until Christianity came along, supposedly, in the kind of neo-pagan mythology. They used to do this thing. They'd build this giant structure shaped like a man out of wicker, type of wood, type of vine. And they'd fill it with prisoners and they'd fill it with live people. And then they would light it on fire. and that was how they these peaceful, nature-loving druids would sacrifice to the gods. So perhaps you could
we'll sacrifice to the dummy gods.
Yeah. All right, man.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
Thank you.